Mr. Kahan, Mr. Nadari, what do you make of it? Because some have been suggesting this withdrawal of Russian planes could be the very first step and eventually could leave Assad regime pretty much on its own, therefore more favoring negotiations. Is that likely to happen?
Absolutely. The whole idea is to send this message to the international community that Russia also seeks a peaceful solution to the Syrian crisis, means through diplomacy and dialogue between the warring factions inside that country. Of course, not the terrorist groups and foreign-backed extremist outfits. At the same time, we all know about the details why Russia decided to withdraw parts of its troops and military hardware from Syria. The mission has been accomplished partially. At the same time, it is about keeping the costs down, especially now that the oil prices are down the drain. At the same time, it is going to send this message to the international community that we have the missile system still in place, we have the naval base still in place, we also have the air base in place, right, in case we needed to attack the terrorist group and their positions against. So Russia is going to stay despite the partial drawdown.
Professor Toker, do you believe, though, this can be the very beginning of various countries' own efforts in making sure things could be getting better when it comes to Syrian peace talk? At least this is also the day when the peace talk began.
Well, the very beginning, perhaps, but we have gone over the last few years through different situations in which the notion of very beginning could have been envisaged, and this could be one more. But I would say two major things regarding this surprise, which is 24 hours old, regarding President Putin's announcement rather, because we still have to watch and see to which extent does he indeed do that, and to what extent, as the aerial and naval bases in Latakia, the Russian ones, are still in operation, and he can indeed switch on and off and actually bring into the military theater more planes and more firepower if he so decides tomorrow, the day after tomorrow, or next month. But once Mr. Putin has engaged in this surprising move, he had objectively introduced into the diplomatic international relation theater, not necessarily into the military one, the element of dynamics, of surprise. And these, we know that as we study international affairs and history. Once you introduce into an extremely complex situation the notion of movement, of dynamics, you may expect all kind of other dynamics, minor ones or major ones, to alter the picture.
We hope,
and this, I think, is the great quality of Mr. Putin's decision.
We hope there will be other blocks that can be moved for the better direction. Of course, Ms. He, you've been attentive listen to our gentlemen from various parts of the world talking about their perceptions. The first UN-based, UN-supported Syrian peace talk just began. Nobody expected to reach anything for the very first round. However, it seems to be the hope at least. What do you make of the current agenda? What do you see as the fundamental conflict here over here?
Actually, this resuming of this talk, I think, served as a basis for understanding why President Putin has made such a sudden announcement, because that's exactly the thing now that President Putin want to push forward, because that has been spent a lot of energy by him to reach this ceasefire, a 2-week ceasefire, and also to resume this talk. But this talk, as you said, is not easy. Actually, it has been so hard. All those substantial challenges has been there. Nothing has been resolved yet, even though U.S. Special Envoy has mentioned this is a quite substantial talk, because now the sequence of the issue now has a lot of dispute. For the government of Syria, they want to put the election first, but for the opposition of the Syria, they want to put the form of those transitional government first. So even the sequence now has a difference.
This is only one of those differences different parts have. The reason we are talking about the war in Syria 5 years is not only because all the humanitarian tragedies happen within the country, but also its enormous amount of impact all over the world. Mr. Lesser, you know this better than I do, coming from originally the United States. Obama administration policy towards Syria has been pretty much criticized. Today, U.S. House of Representatives also ratcheted up its pressure by calling the atrocity over there in Syria by the IS as a genocide. Of course, this means even more on the shoulder of President Obama to act. But what do you think after President Putin already did his part, at least at the very beginning, what could be White House reactions or inactions?
Well, I think Washington will understand what Putin has done. He acted, but he had, in the end, a rather cautious approach to how long he was willing to leave forces in place. Now, we'll have to see what he does. But I think the main point that we should take away for Washington and others is that this is not just a matter of crisis management. It's really the situation in Syria, but frankly, the breakdown of the entire regional order stretching from the Levant to North Africa. We see this also in Libya. So I think the general problem of adjusting to this probably quite durable chaos is going to be with us, whether the ceasefire in Syria holds or not, whether the situation in Syria, whether Syria itself can be put back together or not.
Mr. Lesser, I was reading some references before coming into our discussion. There has been American scholars comparing what's going on right now in the Middle East, particularly concerning Syria, to, let's just say, 17th century European countries when there were wars going on and states were too weak to even patrol and control their own territories, and also the various factors within their territories. Of course, whether that's a valuable comparison is one thing, but the thing is, what has been left over here since the war started is really mind-boggling. Mr. Lesser, do you think Washington and others could work out a plan, or we have to wait until the next president, whoever it is, come into the office?
Well, surely the next administration, whatever the next administration is going to have an approach to these issues. They're going to be forced to have an approach to these issues. But I don't think that it's necessarily going to take the form of trying to impose a return to the previous order. I think simply the breakdown of state systems, the breakdown of relationships in the region has been so complete that it will be very, very difficult to put back together. I think your question really goes to the heart of the problem, which is that previously strong states have simply seen their power evaporate and in some cases have simply broken. I mean, one thinks of Yemen or Iraq or Syria or Libya. It's not just Syria. I think that trend is going to be very, very difficult to reverse and to put back together over the next years. The question of hedging rather than overturning what we now see.
Mr. Nallery, there is a difference between you and all the other three panelists. That is, you are in the region. The others are looking at the region from the rest of the world. Of course, Iran is a very critical player in the region, and the sectarian violence and conflicts are even putting Iran in a much more obvious position. So what role do you think Iran could play after today? The peace talk began, the withdrawal of the Russian planes, and what would that mean from Iran's perspective for the region, the streamlining of all the forces and also the blocs, as Professor Toker mentioned earlier? Mr. Nallery.
Well, that's an important question. With what I have seen today, the official reaction, although they welcome this kind of move, saying that this is going to help resolve the situation through diplomacy and dialogue, but at the same time, I see a lot of disappointed hardliners in this country that they believe that Russia has left them in the middle of the way, and Russia could have done much more than this to stay in the game, to keep pounding the opposition forces' positions and the terrorist groups' positions within the Syrian territory. But obviously, they are not happy to see suddenly this happening. But I can give give you my words that Russia did not do this without coordination with the Iranian and the Syrian governments. But at the end of the day, Russia also needs to protect its own interests. Russia is under immense pressure domestically and internationally. There are a lot of accusations against the Russian government that it seeks confrontation and war in the Middle East. It has made the situation worse, exacerbated the situation on the ground, and wiped out the possibility of dialogue between the warring factions. But I can give you my words that this is going to benefit everyone in the next couple of days when they sit down for talks and to find a peaceful solution to the crisis. But as I just mentioned, Russia wants to send a clear message to the international community that Moscow doesn't seek confrontation.